All right, so I'm going to have our speakers come up and sit at the table, and we'll take any questions. Go ahead.
Hi, Julia Maynor, Rochester. I really liked all of your talks, very diverse topics, and the question that my personal interest was sparked by the mentoring email. It seemed to me a binary choice. I either wanted to be mentored or I wanted to mentor, but I didn't have both opportunities. Is there an opportunity to do that differently? I certainly have, I've been in positions where I can certainly mentor junior people, and there would be some things I would like to be mentored on. Is there an opportunity for both?
So I think that's great feedback. I thought the same myself when I was signing up. It's like, well, which category do I choose? I like both of these things, And to be honest, we don't quite have the whole matching figured out. Maybe we need to go, maybe there's something we can add to the follow-up email so you can sign up for both. We're going to have to be thoughtful about how to exactly do that. I don't know if you have more. Oh, you can click both. See, being the binary person I am, I didn't even think of that as an option. So I've learned something already.
Go ahead.
Richard Puri from Jacksonville. This is a question for Dr. Duncan. Till recently, I didn't know this difference, but your thoughts on how to be a good mentor versus a good sponsor, and how can we be good at both?
The question is how to be a good mentor versus a good sponsor. I think they kind of go together. So the definition I saw earlier, maybe that's what you're referring to, is a mentor is more the kind of relationship that I talked about, informal communication, sustained, ongoing. It's between you and me, versus a sponsor is between me telling the rest of the world about you. I think you saw a lot of examples in the presentations this morning where both of that has to happen, right? So many of us that are involved in the organization, someone was our mentor, and someone, that same person could be our sponsor as well, kind of raising our awareness within the organization. So I think they go hand in hand. I'm not sure how to, I don't think they have to be differentiated. I will say though that we certainly, within the organization, I've done this personally many times, can be a sponsor for someone that I have no personal relationship with. I don't really know them, and we certainly don't have a mentoring relationship, but boy, I notice them, doing good work, contributing, thoughtful, mindful, and so I will sponsor that person. And you'll see that happen multiple times in the organization on all kinds of levels. So, so it's a good comment, and it happens both ways.
Adnan.
Good morning. Adnan Al-Saidi in Seattle. Thank you all for great talks this morning. My question is to Dana, and really an impressively important topic, especially as you know, to a lot of the young people in the field. And it's something that I've always thought about, and I guess my question to you is really, how do you measure the outcome? And so, as a lot of us here who hire people and who look at applicants, and I'm very blessed to be from a very multi-religious, multi-ethnic background, so I feel like I do a good job at this and I pay attention to it, but I know I have a lot of bias still. And so then when I look back and I say, how do I know that I'm doing a good job? And I feel like the answer can't be everything should be 50-50, because I think even in the best of worlds, we still gravitate to what we do best, and different ethnicities and different genders will choose something more than the other. So how do we know that we're doing a good job?
So thank you for that question, and it brings up a really important point. Diversity doesn't mean 50-50. Right. It means that everybody has the same opportunity to get the job, and the best person gets that job. And that we're looking at everybody, and that we're measuring people based on metrics and intentionality versus, oh, I like this person, we went golfing, and I might like this person a little bit more than somebody else, and give them that job. And I think, how do we measure these outcomes is it's a hard question, and it goes to what do you want to do, right? What are your goals? And I think that if your goal is to have a diverse faculty, then that's the outcome that you want to look at. And one of the things I can tell you that we're doing at Michigan is we've changed our recruiting process to be very intentional. So each new hire and each thing that we put out, we make sure we are interviewing people from underrepresented minorities and a woman and whomever else applies. That doesn't mean that they're going to get the job, but they're getting the opportunity that they may or may not have had otherwise. And by doing that and by being intentional, you will get the results you want. I heard a really good story. Jennifer Lindemann, who runs our advanced program, she was telling me in engineering that every year they nominate these people for awards, and each year a man would win. And they said, well, how are we going to change this? Well, what they did was they put up 2 people to nominate. So if somebody was on the fence about who to nominate, then they might pull in somebody else who they may not have done it. And within a couple years, there was a 70, 30, 60, 40 split between men and women. Sometimes it's just bringing people to the party, and then it'll come if you're open.
Mark.
Mark Talamini from Stony Brook. Those were 3 stellar talks, so thank you, all 3 of you. And I almost hesitate to bring up what may sound like a pedestrian comment or question, but I do it with my editor hat firmly on. And that is the role of writing. So, Brian, you said write well. I would go another step, write period. I think that,
Not a full sentence.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
The ability to express yourself well with the written word, I think, is now even more important than ever. It was important in the era of just books and chapters, but now, with so many modalities of writing, it's even more important. And I think it's just absolutely critical to rising in any setting, any organization, not just medicine. So I wonder if the 3 of you and others have comments about how to be successful, not just in writing well, but just in writing, period.
Maybe we'll have the English major start.
I actually have to take that back because a single verb can be a complete sentence, so I apologize. So I agree that writing is critical, and I'm not sure if you meant writing for journals in particular, if you just meant expressing yourself through writing. So we have a lot of opportunities to do that, and the framing the style of your writing to the communication desired. Using bullet points when all you have is points to make, resisting the temptation to add extra words. I always go back to everything I've written and strike out about 1/3 of the words, making sure that you're using the pronoun, not just a noun to describe things, not sort of saying they when you mean sages or you mean that committee or something specific for references. So I do think communication is critically important. I hesitate to say that I think there's an error in being too casual. I get a lot of emails from people that I'm quite surprised don't have any attention to form. So that may be my age, but again, I go back to the idea that you have to tailor your communication to what you're after. So if you're emailing me, write it nicely. And so I agree with you. I think it's incredibly important, and it gives us an opportunity to get rid of some of bias in conversation, right? So if you're not presenting yourself in person with all of your sweaty flaws, your bad hair, your unpleasant dress, or whatever else is coming along with you, if it's just being presented in writing, then you have the opportunity to judge on the merit of the idea and not in the person. So that is another tool in the armamentarium of dealing with bias.
I think I would just add that less is always more when it comes to writing. So I agree with that sentiment that the natural tendency, I think especially in people, and I don't want to hold myself out as a great writer, but I think the natural tendency that I see in trainees, for instance, that come to the lab and start to write or are putting proposals together is just too many words. It is much harder to say what you want to say with less words, and take the time to do that and the effort to do that. Be organized, be succinct, and that will get your idea across. I will say there's also an etiquette to email that we don't really follow in our culture. There's a great book called The Hamster Revolution, which talks about managing email. And one of the #1 principles in that book is send less to get less. And so just emails are important forms of communication, and they should, especially when you're going formally through an organization, be mindful of how you're putting that together as well.
Yeah. I mean, I would say this is a work in progress for me. It's something that I keep striving to get better and better and better at, and it's little headway. I'd say read a lot. Read the journals you want to publish in. Just keep reading, see different styles, see how people communicate, find styles and ways that people communicate really well, and try to figure out how to emulate that. When you're composing emails, I'm guilty of this too. Sometimes I send very informal emails, and that might just be a function of my age and everything. But if you're doing something you don't know, formal's always better, and then you can back down. But you don't want to offend somebody on the first pass by accident, and nobody gets offended by a formal email. But if you just are like, "Hey Joe, what's up? I want to do stuff for the board," that might not work out well for you unless you have a very good relationship with her. So just thoughts.
Stephen Stain from Albany. I just wanted to publicly thank Dana and Dan for what they did for a project that I was involved with, and it sort of exhibits how quickly things can happen in SAGES. I'm a member of the Society of Black Academic Surgeons, and we had an idea with SU West to have a leadership program, and I just sent an email to Sally and Dan in August and what about this idea for a leadership program to be inclusive and have a diverse leadership program for all underrepresented minorities. And within 2 months, SAGES talked about the executive committee, approved it, funded it, and Colin and Raquel are a product of those two people's hard work getting it done so quickly. I just want to thank you both publicly.
I actually want to thank the exec because they funded 2 spots. Initially, we had only funded 1, and they really came through and said this is really important, and we had 2 phenomenal candidates, and they came through and funded 2, and that was really huge, so thank you guys so much.
Jerry?
I'd like to address the idea of mentorship and menteeship, and I think that if you talk to people who've been successful, whether it's in SAGES or any other organization, and you ask them how they got there, I think that there are a couple of things that maybe haven't brought up. One is role modeling. I think we may not be conscious of it, but each of us are being observed by a lot of other people, and sometimes people call it the hidden curriculum, et cetera. But I think we often make our own career decisions based on an observation of people, even if those people are not mentors or sponsors to us directly. So I think we all have a responsibility and an opportunity to influence other people by our behavior. The other thing is that I think a lot of successful people will tell you they've often had multiple mentors, and they have mentors that they seek out for advice for particular aspects of their career. And speaking from the mentee perspective, because I think we're all being mentored by others, that's something that we should be conscious about and look for, and understand that each of us is quite unique in terms of what our aspirations are, and to actively seek out advice, role modeling, and mentorship for the aspects of our career that we're trying to advance and foster.
Can I just add one thing on well, 2 things on the mentorship. One is that with this program that is beginning in SAGES, where we're kind of matching mentor and mentee, from the mentor standpoint, don't overcommit. So if you look at yourself as a leader in the organization and you think you have mentoring to do, or just, you don't want to sign up for that commitment, that longitudinal commitment that has goals and objectives, unless you're going to deliver on it. So be thoughtful about that. The other thing was, I wanted to go back to the sponsorship question. Sponsorship should happen because people are doing good work for the organization and they're recognized for that. It's different from self-promotion, which is usually recognized quickly as superficial and discounted. So keep your head down, do good work, and you'll be noticed that way and ascend quickly.
Jeff?
Well, thank you. I want to thank all the speakers for wonderful talks. I want to start with a quick story, and then I want to ask you, Dana, a question regarding diversity. John F. Kennedy wrote a very, very interesting article, obviously a long time ago, about groupthink and his response to the Bay of Pigs invasion, because he had surrounded himself with so many like thinkers. And he changed that for the Cuban Missile Crisis with people who he didn't agree with, who he didn't necessarily like. And it really fostered, you know, a collaborative and very successful solution to a very, very hard problem. One of my concerns is we're replacing racial, gender, and ethnic bigotry in this country with intellectual bigotry. We see, and one of my concerns, and this is my question, we see it in the news every day. You voted for Hillary Clinton, you voted for Donald Trump, you must be a bad person, from both sides. And I've seen, you know, we've seen this rise of this intellectual bigotry, and I think it's really getting pervasive, not only in this country, but in other parts of the world as well. And one of my concerns, one of my fears is that we're going to be socializing a whole new generation into this intellectual bigotry. And I think certainly as a society we need to address that. But will that make our job harder because of the socialization into these, you know, into these this type of a system?
I think so. I think we don't know how to have productive conflict. I mean, I agree with you. I think as a society, all we do is finger point. And that's why I think it's really important to learn productive conflict, to sit at a table with people whose ideas are different than you, whose lens is different, who don't agree with you, and learn how to manage those problems without taking it personally, making it personal, and creating. And that's by modeling that behavior. My hope is that our trainees and the people who we interact with, we can't control society and the news, but we can control how we engage amongst people, what our behaviors are, and how we model those conversations. But I share that same concern.
Edward Aoyang from New Mexico. This question's for Dana. Dana, I know we've been good friends for a while, but as an Ohio State grad, go Bucks. I know I have to go over. I have to get over my own unconscious bias now that you're at the University of Michigan. With this question, I'm going to ask in terms of what your responses. Maybe it's conscious bias, actually. So in addition to the initiatives that WRS is doing with regards to the leadership of SAGES as well as to the program itself, can you give some insight into other initiatives or actions that the group is going to kind of propose within the organization moving forward in addition to those two things?
Yeah, so right now we're really working on short and long-term strategies about how to really make sure that our society is very welcoming to everybody. And a lot of those strategies up there aren't really meant at leadership or talking about leadership. It's really meant to say, are we inclusive? What's our messaging? And are we reaching out? One of the first things we did with the committee in general is we had people apply for it and write a paragraph. I think you wrote a paragraph for it, so thank you, and there. And we made it very intentional to pick people who aren't as involved in the society and bring them in and give them a home and have their voices heard. And we've been having a great time doing that. So it's a work in progress. It's an evolution. I don't have a concrete answer for you quite yet, but I will, and we're going to write a white paper, and once that comes out, hopefully soon, by the time the meeting will come, we'll have accountable strategies so that we have to own up to them and make sure that we're meeting those metrics that are going to be very well laid out for everybody. So stay tuned.
Paresh.
Thanks. Paresh Shah, New York, and disclosure member of the board and the AMA delegate. Not to put too fine a point on it, but for all of you in the audience and for all of us attending, I mean, this is a reflection of how SAGES is a vehicle for leadership development in all of our roles, whether you're in private practice, academic practice, or anywhere else. And Joe, as you were presenting on the issue of the absence of a real meritocracy, which I think is absolutely true, and it feeds directly into what Dana was talking about around bias. If any of you have ever read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, it's a perfect case study of how we've deluded ourselves into the concept of a meritocracy. And when you look a little bit deeper, you discover the levels of both bias as well as opportunity as well as good fortune that contribute to how we get to where we are. Recognizing that in and of itself is, I think, you know, it's like the first step in AA. You have to admit that there's a problem, right? I'm not speaking from personal experience, but right. But I think one of the most valuable take-homes from this session, certainly for me, and because it's a lesson you have to keep relearning, is to be consistently mindful, and Dana, that was exactly the right word, of that context, of the recognition that in our professional lives outside of SAGES, and this is just a vehicle, in our departments, in our families, in our social relationships, we live with these all the time, and getting to that point of mindfulness is really critical, and it isn't a one-time event. You have to revisit that mindfulness question. Every time you're hiring someone, every time you're interviewing someone, every time you're going to a meeting, the lesson I've learned at least is that you have to kind of keep reminding yourself of it. So thank you for that.
I want to just, as a brief anecdote, Dana's initial riddle, I heard that as a teenager 3 times, and I couldn't get the answer right. Every time I was like, oh, there's something really weird about that. You have to keep really learning it.
Jeff?
Great talks, everyone. So we're talking about meritocracy, working hard, doing everything possible. All 3 of you are parents. All 3 of you have family. All 3 of you have careers. Hopefully you have some hobbies. Tell us how you do the balance, because it's got to be something where there has to be some priorities here and there, but we also have a balance in our lives. And I just want to hear, as we try to get all these people involved in the organization, how there's still priorities in life. And maybe you can kind of describe that. And for the other cheesehead at the table, go Badgers.
I like that all the bias is conscious today. That makes me feel more comfortable.
So I'll talk about that a little bit. And I think, is Alphonse Pomp still in the room? I saw him when I first walked in, because Alphonse asked me to give a talk. I used to be very popular on the give a talk circuit because I had 4 kids, and I was married to another surgeon. And I was on an upward trajectory in my career, and so everybody wanted me to give a talk on the balance, have it all thing. Nobody wanted to hear what I had to say about GE junction surgery. But Alphonse heard one of my rah-rah, you can do it all, just work really hard and be really practical and plan really well, and you can definitely have it all and be just like me. And he asked me to give that talk. Again, to inspire some of his residents. And we scheduled it for about 9 months after he heard it. There was a snowstorm, it got canceled. And I went back 2 years after he heard the original. And by then I was like, actually. And so I think realistically that it's about staging. It's about prioritizing different things at different points in your life. And I think it actually is about recognizing the old saw that that if you wish to have it all, you're going to have to stage it. That you can't do everything well all at one time, and just be realistic and supportive of each other. And that actually does get back to the meritocracy idea. Steve Schweitzberg and I were talking a long time ago about where all the promising young fellows had disappeared to. All the people who showed up at SAGES and were doing great work on the committees when they were 35 years old, and then they were sort of gone. We had this like weird age gap, and we realized that they were struggling with the initial issues of getting their careers ramped up and trying to manage a family. And we were like, let's call the people who were active on committees 7 or 8 or 10 years ago and see if they've passed through that phase and want to come back in. And we did lasso in a couple of people. So they had to stage, and I think that they were helped by our extending a hand, because they thought they were done. They thought they were out. That for me is really, you can't really actually have it all at one time. You have to prioritize it a little bit.
I totally agree with that, Joe. That definitely describes me. I mean, I have a husband who's a surgeon also, and I had my kids, very early in my as a faculty, and I had to take some time off, and then SAGES was really gracious in allowing me to come back in and get active once my husband was actually able to take care of my kids without texting me 5,000 times.
That was just 2,000.
Now it's just 2,000, right?
It takes, everybody says, it takes a village. So my life's, there's always a bunch of moving parts. So I live in Ann Arbor. My husband still works in New York City. So Monday through Thursday, he's in New York. I'm single momming it. And so what I've learned is outsource. So if there's something you don't need to do, outsource that. I pay a lot of money for childcare because I don't want to worry that if my kid gets sick, I have nowhere to put her. I don't want to be stressed. I have a full-time babysitter, and I have daycare every single day. My babysitter gets sick, she goes to daycare. If she gets sick, my babysitter stays home. And I have networks on networks of backups so that I don't have to be stressed out. We have somebody who comes and cleans the house because when I have time off on a Saturday, I don't want to be doing that so I can be present for my kid. So it's figuring out what your priorities are, what can you offload from your plate, what can you put on there. And then you have to figure out what's important to you. My kid, my one child, I don't know how you do it with four, I can barely do it with one, is my priority, and she always comes first. And so when I'm home and I'm not on call, my phone goes to the side and she gets my quality time. When I'm off on a Saturday, you know, I'll do my work earlier when she's not up, and that is my time with her. But it's also because I've outsourced a lot of these other things that I don't have to be doing when I'm with her. And I agree. You can have everything. You might not be able to have it all at once. It's always easy to see people's successes. It's not easy to see the trajectory that got them there. It's very easy to look at people and say, oh my God, they have it all. They're so young, or they're so this, and they're doing this and that. But you don't know all the stuff that goes on kind of in the periphery, in the background that goes it. So just be kind to people, be their village, help them out, and just do your best. One foot in front of another every day.
I don't think I can be held out as the poster child of balance in life, so I don't know how well qualified. I will say that I think as far as balance between this kind of work and my home life, one thing that I think is important to emphasize, to help the family understand is this isn't a hobby. Like this, I'm not at the golf course right now like a hobby or out fishing or, you know, that kind of thing. It was mentioned earlier about how SAGES has the ability to amplify ideas and disseminate them internationally. And so I view this type of work as doing meaningful work that allows me to participate in something that's bigger than me. And so to help them understand that you know, Dad's not just going away to some other meeting, but he thinks that this might have some impact on something beyond him, that's helpful, so that they don't feel like you're just leaving them for another superficial thing, that you're leaving them for something that's meaningful and you're trying to make an impact in the world. And that doesn't smooth out everything, and they still get mad at you, but I think it helps a little bit in that they don't feel resentful that you're doing something like, you know, going fishing instead of spending time with them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I take my daughter rounding with me Saturday mornings if I have to go in, because I want her to see where mommy is. I'm not, you know, going on pony rides or whatever she has concocted in her head that she thinks I'm doing. I've taken her to conferences with me. I've had her come and see me speak, because I want her to know that when I'm not with her, it's not like I'm doing all these things without her. I want her to have a sense of where I am and who I am and why that's happening. So I've actually been very intentional with that with her as well.
I know this is a long answer, but one thing I would add, and we heard this, is that SAGES is a family, so get your significant other involved in the organization with you. We love that, and my wife has friends within the organization as well, and so bring the gang.
Pascal Fuchshuber from the Bay Area, California. I just want to disclose that I also thought about the gay couple as the answer for this. Being from California, maybe, and whatever, you know, old white male helped out with that. I want to make a comment for the young people that come into this organization, and I want to rebut the sense that maybe we have intellectual bigotry going on. I absolutely do not think that that's the case. I think that this is a society that actually, I would put the term family to the mentee-mentor relationship, where you can actually really have a true relationship, personal relationship, without fear of a two-way street, where you can also influence your mentor, and don't be afraid of doing that. If you put in the work and if you get some credit, you're going to learn a lot about relationships with your mentor. The leadership in this society knows how to listen and is very sensitive to these issues, which is really why I love to be a member of SAGES compared to other societies. So don't be afraid to speak up. We listen to you.
Mike.
Michael Brunt, St. Louis. Just again, acknowledgement to Dan and Steve of this tremendous program and great talks. Dana mentioned the concept of cognitive diversity, and Joe mentioned some of the members that may not get to come to a committee meeting, and that struck me because I think a part of our process in leadership is if you get these, if you're president and you get the list of members or your committee chair and you see somebody who's not been at a committee meeting for 2 years or 1.5 or 2 years, you've missed several, you're likely to drop off that list. And I think we need to do a better job of reaching out to those people. And particularly, this, I think, engages a lot of the community surgeons because it's it's more difficult than ever now for people to get time away and come to the meeting. And if you're that person who's on the committee and can't make it, a practical suggestion is send a note to the chair and co-chair. I'm sorry I can't make it to the college or SAGES, the committee meeting this year but I'd like to be involved, and please, assign me to do something, or if I can call in or whatever. And so I think that's probably something that we could have a better structural process around to engage those people, because they got on the committee because they were interested to begin with. And so we just need to do a better job, I think, on our end of making it easier for them.
Agreed. All right. Any other questions? All right, I think we'll move on to the rest of the session.
Probably the only invited speaking invitation I had that I turned down was from the AAS when they wanted me to give a talk on life balance, and my wife said, "You're not qualified." But more recently, I learned what I do, because she came back and told me what you actually do is you have work-life integration. And I go, well, that's right. And I was thinking about it today. When my son was born and Phil Sauer and I had a little infant, we were both pushing them in strollers together at a SAGES meeting. My kids got a little older. We brought them to Top Gun for Kids and gave them to Butch Rosser, and then later Butch put them to work. My college freshman just applied for her first abstract to SAGES. So the kids have all been part of my journey in a very big way, and have got to know a lot of the fellows and people going through. So maybe it's not balanced. Maybe the challenge is integration.